I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. So Tim and Tom, I'm so grateful for the chance to talk with you. I've gone through your book. Talk about a book. It says the schools we need now. No fooling. Is that ever what this book is all about? And so I want to dive into it and go through it a little bit with you. But rather than me introducing you, I thought maybe you could introduce each other, since you know each other better than I know you. Even though, Tim, you and I have worked, I'm thinking maybe a decade. We've been working together in Chicago for many years. But if you'd introduce yourself, that'd be great. And then we'll get right into the questions.
Sure. Well, I'm always thankful to be able to introduce Tom Golebiewski because he was one of those first people I met when I started teaching. When I arrived at the high school he was in as the social work department chair, and he had spent years before that serving as a licensed clinical social worker in a couple of schools, and came to New Trier High School where in the 80s, and very quickly became the department chair of what was a really amazing social work department in this large suburban high school, and led that department for a couple of decades. And during that time, he was instrumental to not only the internal compass of who we were as a district and caring for kids, but I think Tom was also has also been very giving with his time in terms of working with colleagues to help improve their skills. I was an English teacher, so it was important for me to learn some of those skills on how to work with kids in different ways than just through academics. And Tom was giving all kinds of professional learning at that time, leading committees, was one of our first folks to sort of bring bullying and harassment training to us, and continue to lead equity work and all kinds of important initiatives in the school. A leader at New Trier, as not only in his department but in the school, and a role model for all of us. And when the other thing that Tom did that was incredibly important during this time as he was working in this school was he was also working in the community. And Tom has always been deeply connected to the community, deeply connected to reaching out to organizations so that we could all work together. And so he spent a lot of his time doing that, and along the way became a first responder for the American Red Cross, and did some of that work going to disaster zones and helping out with the people there. He became a really important part of our crisis response team, and really we call him the social work traffic cop when it comes to the work that had to be done around crisis. And then in 2013, he was able to take the teacher retirement system to its advantage as he finished that first part of his career as a social worker, and has since gone on in the last 12 years to be not retired, but to rather be very highly engaged in an independent school in Chicago that works with students in a college prep environment who are neurodiverse, and has done amazing work there, has taught at 3 different universities, including his alma mater of Loyola University, where he teaches social work interns and courses there. And we were lucky to work and teach together at Northwestern. We actually taught a class together at Northwestern, which was a hilarious experience for us, and but a good one. And then has his private practice, which he continues to do incredible work there. And then on top of all that, he and I have been crisscrossing the state of Illinois doing work with administrators and educators and parents on developing mentally healthy schools. And that has led to all kinds of writing that he's done. Tom also is what I call has a black belt in circle keeping, and is someone who goes on mindfulness retreats, and maybe a personal piece, has a very impressive daily sitting practice that he does every morning, way before I ever wake up. But he meditates every day, and it's part of his life and who he is. So that's Tom Golebiewski, Dr. Tom Golebiewski.
Wonderful.
A lot of doings, but I'll talk and introduce Dr. Tim Dohrer. in terms of being. So we've had a relationship now for over 35 years. And it's one that is based upon kind of a deep care for teaching and learning, but mostly for kids in schools and the school as a community, as an environment. So Tim is a passionate educator. He's not only a passionate educator, he's passionate about writing and language, and started his career as an English teacher, as a soccer coach, as a journalist, club sponsor, and it's embedded in his DNA. He deeply cares about the world. He's been a teacher leader, and as we grew up and grew old through working in a school for well over together over 25 years. Teach with Tim was a classroom teacher and advisor. Went off to Penn State to get a PhD in working in curriculum and instruction. Came back and really was one of the strong voices in the school that addressed climate and culture, that addressed equity issues, and kind of he's also a data guy. So was looking at what do we know about the school in terms of it being kind of a healthy, effective place and an engaging place to be. Spearheaded our school climate and research teams, school safety, and then became principal. And so one of our relationship became cemented in his first year as the interim principal. And we did, it was a horrific year of crisis, a year filled with just all kinds of horrific experiences that were painful and traumatizing. 5 years later, we left New Trier at the same time. Tim moved on to Northwestern University in teacher education, teacher leadership, and for 10 years kind of spearheaded that program, and then transitioned to Northern Illinois University, but now at National Louis University in terms of teacher leadership, and particularly in terms of looking at the next generation of principals. So we are kindred spirits, have had a lot of life experience related to what schools are like. And, about 10 years ago, we began doing some trainings for the Illinois Principals Association, some teaching, and at some point in time decided to write the book in terms of what a mentally healthy school would be like, and give a model that schools could use to take a look at their own state of well-being. So my good friend and colleague, Tim.
Wonderful. I thank you so much. And I'm so glad I asked you guys to do that rather than me doing it. I like to ask this question a lot about books, is I believe every book has a story of sort of how it came to be. What's the story for this book, The Schools We Need Now? How did that come to be?
Well, I'll start. When we started doing this work in 2013, it was not to write a book. We have, and if you look at it over 10 years, it took us 10 years to write the book. What did we do in the meantime? We were focused on working with administrators and educators to think about retooling their schools. So we were doing this in the, certainly 2013, 2014, 2015. And we started doing all this other stuff. We did courses, we did asynchronous courses, all kinds of things, and these workshops. So by the time we got around to writing the book, it was, we had a lot of material. I went back and discovered that we had an outline in the book back in 2015. So that was a while ago. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that put a pause on a lot of projects. And then I had a little bit of some time on my hands and was able to say to Tom, I think it's time to write the book. I think we've got the time to do it. Let's sit and do it. And the book actually did not take very long to write because we had all that material. So instead of sort of writing a book and then spending 10 years going out and talking about it, we were talking about it and then wrote the book. So I think it's an interesting different story. I've talked to a few authors who said, I didn't have all those years leading up to it. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that when we looked at that previous outline and we presented that outline to our editors to think about, is this the way the book should be shaped? They were like kind of lukewarm on it. And then we sort of described what we did in our one-day workshop with administrators of walking them through how to develop a comprehensive mental health action plan, which is really at the core of the book. And they loved that. And so the outline of the book is actually mirrors the outline of our one-day workshop. So it was sort of a well-tested idea. And then we just had so much material that it wrote itself in a lot of ways.
The only an area that I would add is, what's the why behind the book? And as kind of a co-author in a book, it's kind of bringing your own stories forward. School was always kind of a significant place for me in terms of my life experience. In some way was kind of the, to use some of the attachment language in terms of attachment there. It's a secure base and a safe haven. And so as I landed at New Trier, where I was, as Tim referenced, the social work department chair for over a quarter of a century, it was heartfelt work. And it was also heartbreaking work in that. And so a part of the motive, in terms of what's the story of the book, is schools have tremendous power to not only teach and learn, but to help and heal. But schools can also be kind of fraught with kind of potential kind of experiences that can also be one that are not so helpful and can actually be harmful. So the story is kind of telling a story that help people to think about what schools can do and what's the impact that they can have upon individual lives, but within our society.
So your subtitle is A Guide to Designing a Mentally Healthy School. I'm reading it to make sure I get it right here. A Guide to Designing a Mentally Healthy School. I think everybody who's going to listen to this podcast probably has a definition in their mind of what mental health is. But is there anything in particular we need to know when you use the term, what we mean by mental health?
There are a lot of definitions about mental health, and I think one of the challenges that schools and communities face is actually your question of what are we actually talking about here?
Right.
In that, so if Tim's going to reference the definition that we use from the World Health Organization, but for me, it has much to do with kind of being present in life and living it as fully as you possibly can. And when you're facing adversity, to be able to build capacity for resilience. So with that, to me, what I would translate it in terms of some fundamental characteristics is emotional balance and self-regulation, empathy and compassion, and having a sense of knowing the why in terms of developing skills for purpose and productivity. So that would be my take on what a mentally healthy school is: a system and a culture that promotes connection and well-being.
And we worry a little bit that when people say mental health, are they really talking about mental health in a very pro-social, positive way? Or do we think about it from a lens of, is it mental illness? I think people say mental health, but maybe they're thinking mental illness. So we do believe that every school, I don't think many schools have conversations as a school community about what do we believe is mentally healthy, what is mental health. And so we believe that the beginning of a mental health action plan is to actually have that conversation. What do we mean by mental health? What do we not mean by mental health? And come up with a common definition. We do offer, the World Health Organization has a pretty good definition of mental health. They say mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. So we oftentimes start with that because it's a pretty good one. But if someone wants to come up with their own, that's great too.
Well, it sounds like it's much more than the absence of mental ill health or unhealth. It's purpose and connection and the capacity for productivity, perseverance, a few more P's probably, but all those things seem to be wrapped up in it. So then what is a mentally healthy school? Because that's really the core concept in your book, as I see it. What do we mean by a mentally healthy school?
there are some common factors that all schools that are leaning into health will have in terms of connection, belonging, routines, instructions, and structures in place. Um, I think that we recently went off and did a school audit and school visit. And one of the things that stood out for me is, what's the secret sauce of a mentally healthy school? And each school is going to have something unique and distinct to them that is makes them kind of who they are. So a mentally healthy school, I think, is one that does focus upon rigor, but it also provides support. And I would distill, a couple of factors. One, a sense of community and belonging. So the engagement piece. One that is developmentally informed in terms of it knows its students and who they are and where they are in terms of development. And one that is has a sense of empathy and compassion. In terms of recognizing that there's a lot of life that happens in schools and what the students and staff who come into them.
One of the things that we think about in terms of being a whole school approach, we certainly believe, Tom and I believe, that having a whole child approach is really critical, or a whole person approach is critical when you think about individuals. But we should have that same approach to school systems and think about them in terms of the academic, the social, the emotional, and the physical dimensions of school. That really is what creates a school culture. And it also means not just thinking about the kids, but we have to think about, what does a healthy school look like for the adults, the teachers, the staff, the parents and families that come into that school is as critical as as for the students. So we have to think about mental health for schools as a system is in a very broad way.
So at the risk of asking a leading question, the title is "The Schools We Need Now." So why is a mentally healthy school the school we need now?
Wow, great question. Well,
I could give you an answer too. Sorry to interrupt, but I could put lots of reasons, but I'd like to hear your reasons.
Well, one of the things that brings us to this work is I think there's a positive, for me anyway, there's one positive and then one negative that drives this work. I've seen schools that I think are pretty healthy do wonderful and amazing things to not only support students, as Tom said, but actually heal them. That schools can be healing centers, places where we actually become more well in our physical selves and our mental and social and intellectual selves. So for me, the schools we need now, we need these schools now more than ever as kids are facing what I'd say is the negative, which are the challenges. Never before have we had the challenges to our mental health as we have today. And it's not just my opinion, there's fact to go along with it. When we look at the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey over the last 20 years, there is an absolute doubling of kids who are feeling sad, lonely, and depressed. This is fact. These are numbers that can't be denied, and it's been an upward slope since 2009. And we've reached a fever point where it is a difficult thing to be a young person in this world. It's a difficult thing to be an old person in this world for all kinds of different reasons. We believe that schools are places that can help us manage that stress.
To add to that, I think we've always needed mentally healthy schools. I'm not sure we've always had the will, and we've always bumped up against issues related to stigma around what are we talking about when we're focusing upon mental health and that. But I think we've always needed them. I think we are in a time of a lot of uncertainty and turmoil, and I think having schools and having communities that are focusing upon safety, both physical, psychological, emotional safety, engagement, it provides that sense of safety, security, and can provide that sense of safety, stability, and security. So I think we've always need them, but in our current state, I think we need something to kind of ground us and anchor us in a way that is going to kind of promote not only coping, but as Tim referenced, helping and healing.
Now, you think about the global epidemic of loneliness. Vivek Murthy's book Together lists off location after location around the world where loneliness is in a crisis situation. Then you think about the technology has lots of advantages. I love my little iPhone. I love the GPS. I love my little jukebox. But at the same time, technology is alienating us. And then we've got political turmoil and all the different things going on. And it seems to me one of the things about the book is that mental health, correct me if I've got this wrong, because I might have this wrong, but it seems to me there's what I can do personally, and there's the context in which I live. And the context can have a really big impact on my mental health. And some people might be more perseverant. We don't know what their genetic makeup is and the families they grew up in. Some people may be less, but the context we create for people will make a big difference in their mental health, I would think.
It does tie into, as you go through the book, the early part of the book talks about mental models.
Right.
And one of the mental models that we anchor in the book is an ecological systems perspective, that we are all in this together. And that there are things that communities and schools can do that promote a sense of connection and well-being. But again, that point that if you're not paying attention to what might even be what your values, you're likely to find that there's some disconcerting experiences in schools that need attention. Like one of the things, we worked in a school that had a incredible mission statement: minds to inquiry, hearts to compassion, lives to the service of humanity. Now, as a social worker working in a school, what better charge or calling could you have? But what also was interesting is we had a lot of disconfirming data and, if you will, a counter narrative that needed some attention in order to really talk about what is our mission and how are we living it. So it's, an interesting time that we're living in. But to go back to that original idea, I think we've always needed to pay attention to mental health.
Well, what are a couple other those mental models? Now, I first heard the concept mental model reading Peter Senge's Fifth Discipline, where he basically, it's a little bit like a paradigm, is how I understood what Senge said. But what are a couple more of the mental models you talk about in the book, and why do you think they're important?
Well, we have several. One is whole child, whole school, whole community.
Mm-hmm.
But the part that I'm drawn to with that question is, in the field of mental health, we have learned an awful lot about the brain and what neuroscience can teach us in even very simple ways of that mind-body-brain connection, and even some really overly simplistic strategies like the 90-second rule. And the 90-second rule is, how much time it takes for the stress hormones to circulate through our bloodstream, and whether or not we're paying attention to that. And if we can pay attention to it, like softening, quieting the body, we're able to kind of turn off the fire alarm in our brain, the amygdala, and then access executive functioning skills. So that 90-second rule is something that is simple to teach. And when we're feeling stress, when we're feeling a sense of dysregulation, it's a skill that by just pausing and grounding and breathing deeply can kind of quiet the mind. And so I think neuroscience and some of those ideas are another mental model that schools can embrace and to think about.
Yeah, I think, the one about whole child, I think, is really significant. Many people really don't have a whole child mental model. Their mental model is an academic mind. They see children and our purpose of schools to be 100% about teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. As I always joke, with arithmetic spelled wrong in the 3 R's. But that's our mental model. And we go to schools, and you might be in a school where people are putting on the walls the scholarships that seniors have received, the colleges that they're going to. We tout our test scores and we have school report cards that tend to focus more on test scores rather than the other things. That's a mental model that school is about academics, and that kids, we only think about the sort of the student brain, the brain, the cognitive side of who kids are, instead of thinking about the fact that they also bring their physical selves to school, which oftentimes may be deprived of sleep, of nutrition. They might be thinking about other things that are more in the social domain. Are emotional beings. And, we don't think or make decisions without emotion being part of what we do. And so if we only have a one-dimensional view, that mental model that is just one-dimensional, we may not see why it's important to do maybe some mindfulness techniques, to teach kids how to breathe, to teach kids about neuroscience, to have relationships being our first thing rather than our second, third, or fourth thing. And so I think that's a great example of how that if you have a particular mental model, it drives you in a certain direction. And you can look at the last 20 years of education and say, wow, that's the mental model that's been driving us. The belief that we can assess ourselves into school success. And the fact is that it hasn't worked. If you have a different mental model and you think about the whole child or the whole system, suddenly it changes a lot of the decisions that you would make on a daily basis.
And then to add to that, in terms of another mental model that I think is really useful for schools and leaders in schools to think about, is we adapted the MTSS model and applied it to, we asked a question, if a school were to center every and any decision they made in their system around mental health, what would it look like? And so we used the MTSS model to talk about, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 types of interventions and really emphasize prevention. So along those lines are considering a culture of care and a continuum of care. In terms of that is responsive to student and systemic needs in that, and really embedded, that sense of connection and belonging where kids can be seen and where skills can be taught, and when resources are needed, they can be accessed in that. But that would be another mental model that we emphasize within the book, a culture of caring and a continuum of care.
I've often asked the question, you're making me think about this, how would our schools be different if we didn't just assess achievement? Like, what if we took love of learning and we assess that? Or what if we look at Martin Seligman's PERMA acronym, positive experiences, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment? If we were looking at those kind of things, we would have completely different schools. But because our focus is so zoned in on achievement, that other stuff kind of gets, well, that's nice, but really, will the scores go up is the thing. And what if you have a school that has high achievement scores and kids who hate learning? Do you really feel you've been successful? Or kids who are struggling to have positive experiences? So I think that's a great point you're making with this book, that the whole child is not just your test scores. The whole child is a child who has strong positive relationships, who likes coming to school, who feels that. I interviewed this one student once, 11th grade high schooler, and he said to me, when lunchtime comes, I take my lunch, I go to the bathroom, I get in the stall, I lock the door. He said, I eat my lunch in the bathroom every day. He said, I can't take that cafeteria.
Yeah.
Well, that's a kid. He's probably getting good scores on the achievement test, but that's not a kid for whom school is helping them flourish. So it's very, very timely what you're saying. You talk about universal supports for all. Tell me a bit about what you mean by that and what that would look like.
Well, that really goes to the multi-tiered systems of support paradigm that we believe in. And that's what tier 1 is all about. Tier 1 is, what does the school do for everyone? Doesn't matter your ability, doesn't matter what your interests are. It's all about what the school has built as a baseline. They're saying, this is the ground floor. This is what we're going to give to every kid to help them be successful. And in a prevention model, if we spend more time focusing on what we're giving to everybody, we make sure everybody gets the same kind of support, whether that's academic support, social emotional support, physical support. We look at things like instruction in the classroom. What are all kids getting in terms of really great instruction? We look at the curriculum. Can every kid say, I see myself in the curriculum that I'm being taught? When it comes to assessment, are kids engaged in assessing themselves, not just this outside force assessing them? It's student-centered. When we look at academic supports, can all kids access a math resource center? Can all kids get access to literacy support? Whatever it might be. So we look at that as being critical to a healthy school is that they have a very firm, strong support system in all areas of the school for all kids, because we want to also build systems in tier 2 and tier 3 for more individualized support for kids who need something very specific, individualized, and specialized. So, and we also believe that if you build a really good tier 1 system, you reduce the number of times that kids have to access tier 2 supports, which might cost a little more, might be a little more that they have to interact with a more intense level. And certainly in tier 3, we want to reduce the number of kids who need really specialized support. And we do that by increasing what we do in tier 1.
Mm. Yeah, I think often the challenge in terms of addressing that question has to do with the politics of school and the resources of school, in terms of what are we able and willing to support, and aligns with, what do we value, especially when you kind of focus upon the tier 3 interventions, which are, youth who are really struggling with significant health, mental health, and social issues. And, it's the other part that schools can't do it alone, that there's a need to have partnerships within the community to provide resources and support.
Well, going back to the previous conversation too about, or the previous part of our conversation about achievement, it's going to be pretty hard for those kids to achieve if they're suffering, And so, even if you have that laser-like focus on achievement, if you want to increase achievement, you probably need to increase mental health. Not that that's hopefully that's not the only motivation. What do you think coaches need to know about mental health that would help them be more effective in their role? And I know that's the first thing they could do is they could read the book, but what are a couple of things you think they should know?
Well, I'll start and you can chime in. One, I think an interesting and intriguing part of leaning into coaching currently is knowing about trauma, and how trauma affects us in a number of different ways. But when you kind of step back, is like trauma gets under our skin, and that's and it really affects us on a cellular way. So one is knowing trauma triggers, and knowing kind of how what our own life experiences have been in terms of what are our own stories, what are our own needs, and being able to recognize the signs as a place to start in terms of developing, not only relationships with others in terms of being able to address these ideas, but it leans into kind of the experience of self-care, self-compassion, and then relationship and capacity building. So that would be one.
So, it's interesting because coaches to me operate at 3 different levels. It's who they are. And so we want to recognize who they are as both coaches and teachers. You wear that dual role, but we got to think about, as Tom said, coaches being in really good touch, self-reflection, self-awareness, being able to know who they are and what they're going through. And I'll get to the reason why in a second. They also then operate with their colleagues. So when they're sitting face to face with a colleague in a coaching session, to be able to recognize the signs in their colleague that maybe we're here to talk about that math lesson that they have coming up, and we're here to support them. But we look into their eyes and we see there's something else going on here. Maybe we shouldn't just leap right into that conversation about the lesson, but instead say, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" I think we have a role to play with our peers as a coach to ask those questions and make sure the teacher is ready for what we're about to do together. And it may be there's something going on where they're not. And so what role do I play in their lives as a coach? How do I ask them, how are you? What's going on with you? Is there anything I can do to help? And then, of course, any of these skills that we're using or teaching can then be used by the teacher in the classroom with kids. So coaches have this ability and this really interesting identity that's about themselves, it's about their colleague, and it's about kids. And having a deep understanding of neuroscience, having a deep understanding of some of these techniques that we can employ to become more self-regulated is going to help them in all 3 of those levels. So I've really come to have a deeper appreciation for how mental health and coaching work together in this really fascinating and I think important way.
One of the things we stressed in reference is the old James Comer quote that it's all significant learning takes place in significant relationships, and that it's all about relationships in terms of not only the interpersonal part of the relationship, but the relationship with the work. And in the work, it's about making connection and establishing safety, and particularly psychological safety.
Now, my good friend Christian van Nieuwerburg, one of his favorite quotations or comments is, everybody is going through something. And so it seems to me, as I'm listening to you, it's about not staying at the surface level. It's about recognizing there are deeper forces at work in every human being, and sort of come from a place of acceptance, even if what you're experiencing is difficult to experience, because everybody's going through something. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Well, and I think it's important then for there to be a tremendous amount of trust between the two people. So when we talk about coaches and teachers, and thinking about, do I feel comfortable enough revealing, am I vulnerable enough to reveal what I'm going through right now with my coach, with the coach who's here to help me? That's a huge leap for a lot of people, especially if we are talking about trauma or anxiety or stress or whatever it is. There's so many things that stop us from building that trusting relationship. And so it's really imperative, I think, on the coach to be able to create that holding space. I mean, this is another term that we've used and others have used before us. This idea of creating a holding space between two people so that we can be vulnerable, so we can share. And if we can do that, now we can dig into all kinds of things, and it becomes a much richer relationship and a much richer coaching experience.
Very interesting. So I'm wondering, just as kind of a last question here, what advice do you have for coaches? Actually, what advice do you have for all of us? And you've already been kind of answering this question all day, but anything else you'd like to add about how we take care of our own mental health?
I've currently been doing some studying with a guy named Thomas Hübl, who has a science background, but he's also a mystic and a spiritualist. And he starts out most of his trainings with really settling oneself. And he starts with the metaphor of taking a screenshot of the nervous system, which is really an interesting kind of metaphor to be used. And we were talking about screens and technology earlier, but turning inward and attending to what's going on in your body at this particular time, and acknowledging it and settling it, and truly kind of seeing if we can relax and engage. So take a screenshot. Take a screenshot of the nervous system, and it sounds, again, simplistic, but it's a place to start.
I think the other place that we talk about quite a bit, and this is really Tom's idea, but one that we really embrace, and that is we are very good pretty much with physical hygiene. The idea of daily taking care of our bodies, brushing our teeth, getting enough sleep, showering, bathing, these kinds of things that are really fundamental, but they take care of our physical selves. The question we should each be asking ourselves right now is, what is my mental hygiene plan? What do I do every day to take care of my mental self? That part of me that is the mind-body-brain connection that is so critical. It could be I make sure I get 8 or 9 hours of sleep every night as an adult, 9 or 10 if I'm a kid. It could be taking a moment every day to do a mindfulness exercise just to settle myself and to get in touch with myself. Could be journaling. Could be going for a walk in nature, which is hugely a powerful experience. Whatever we do, that it's something during the day that helps us do two things. It helps us prepare for the normal stresses and anxieties and traumas of life, and it helps us recover from the normal stresses, anxieties, and trauma of life. If we did that every day, we would not only protect ourselves, it would re-energize ourselves so that we're ready for the next day.
And then the other part that I would add to that is, Tim was emphasizing our focus on self-care, which, people are getting tired of hearing that language, but it's really about attending to self-compassion and then compassion for others.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking paying attention to the chatter in our brains. What are we? And then part of that is, as you said, recognizing, you're the experts on this, but I'm just playing back what I think I heard. Recognizing what are the triggers and how am I going to process those triggers in my day-to-day life so they don't consume me? And do I treat myself like someone I actually like, or do I treat myself like an enemy or as someone I have contempt for? Self-compassion. Self-compassion isn't sappy. It isn't. It's just healthy. It's just the right thing, is to say, I'm going to at least treat myself with the same kind of compassion I'd expend to my dog or my family.
Yeah, it's interesting how that gets played out in terms of standards of perfectionism, and the many, many different variations of that. But a little bit of kindness and gentleness and softness for ourselves really goes a long way to offering it to others.
And let me maybe bring us full circle then to the beginning, where you did that wonderful thing of asking us to introduce each other, as we've known each other for many decades now. Let's also note that it's not just ourselves, but it's the relationships we know, again, from lots of great hard research, that when we are in relationship with someone else, and it could be an animal, could be a dog, could be a cat, could be a bird, could be our kids, could be our partners, could be our friends, our family, that those are also incredibly powerful ways for us to prepare and re-energize ourselves when it comes to dealing with the natural bumps in our lives. And so, having these kinds of connections, having a thought partner, someone you can talk with. I listened to your interview with Costa and Garbston, and I have to tell you, it was just so moving to hear these two, gentlemen who have been in such deep connection with each other for 40 years, and the love and clearly when you asked them that question, they said, we've helped ourselves get through the good times and the bad times. That's what we need. We need colleagues and friends and family who will help us get through the good times and the rough.
Well, not only in relationship with each other, but that's what schools need.
Yeah.
Resources and supports and a commitment to getting through the good times and the bad times with the goal of learning and engaging in life.
Well, I love that. I think that's a good place to close. Thank you both so much. The book is called The Schools We Need Now, and I think it's a perfect title. So I'm very grateful for our conversation. Thank you. But I feel a little healthier just in light of having had the conversation. So
our job has been accomplished.
I've got some ideas to think about for sure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jim.